Okay, so for tonight's retro review, our deep dive, we're going to be talking about The Fisher King. So The Fisher King, this is from 1991. It's considered a comedy slash drama slash fantasy. Of course, it starred Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges. A lot of other interesting people that were in this too. We're going to talk about as we get further into the actual episode. This was directed by Terry Gilliam. The summary here on IMDb says, a former radio DJ, suicidally despondent because of a terrible mistake he made, finds redemption in helping a deranged homeless man who was an unwitting victim of that same mistake. So when we do the retro reviews, typically what we do is we want to start out by talking about how we originally heard about the film. So tell me, Eric, how did you first hear about The Fisher King?
Well, I did actually see it in the movie theater when it originally came out. It came out a while ago, so my memory is a little bit muddy about exactly, because the way I remember it is I think I actually saw it at the Cheapies. We have a discount theater in town that will get films just as they leave their theatrical run and are getting ready to do their home media run, and they will show films basically at a discounted rate. It's like the old dollar theaters that some people might have grown up using. There's still one like that in my area, and there was when I was growing up when I saw this film, and I believe that's where I saw it, was in that kind of a theater environment. But I did see it in the theater, and I remember what a strange film it was to me. And one of the things you really kind of hit the nail on the head about was this is kind of a genre defined film. It is very much sort of a dramedy, however you want to pronounce that. It is a combination of comedy and drama. But again, as you mentioned, there is also very much a fantasy element to this film as well. Now, granted, that fantasy element can be explained away mostly by the fact that our main character, Robin Williams here, is mentally deranged. He's actually been traumatized. So in that sense, it's actually very topical because it deals with the idea of post-traumatic stress. But it really is a kind of not easily defined in terms of genre. And it's a very interesting film. And I just remember being kind of like, I don't know what I think about this when I first saw it, because I did see it in the theater. I'm not sure. I'm sure the reason I went to see it was because Robin Williams was in it. I imagine that's the only reason I went in. It wasn't because I was like, oh, well, it's just going to be kind of like, gosh, I don't even know what you would compare it to at the time. What fantasy film or what kind of film you would compare it to that was contemporary to it. But I probably went in just thinking, hey, I'm going to see a funny Robin Williams movie, and that's not exactly what this is. So it is kind of it doesn't really stick with any specific genre, in my opinion.
So the way that I first heard about The Fisher King, in all honesty, was I just remember seeing the poster. So if you see the image here that we have up for the show, this is kind of the format that we've been using for the retro reviews for the graphics I create for the show. But this poster, I remember seeing this poster very specifically. And from this, there's a little caption up there, and you can read the caption, but you're not exactly sure what you're getting based off this particular poster in terms of what you're going to see kind of in the movie itself.
That poster doesn't say anything about the movie, what the movie actually is.
Right. But this is how I first learned about the film. This is going to be interesting because usually when we talk about these films, I have a very specific connection to them normally in some form. This, of course, was suggested by one of our viewers, listeners, one of the important members of our Rogues Gallery. And this is a film that I don't have a lot of, I don't know, I don't have a lot of attachment to it, but I'll get into that here in just a moment. So when I originally saw The Fisher King, I did not see it in the movie theater because it just didn't seem compelling to me at the time. I don't really remember seeing the trailers for it at all. And when I did actually finally see it the first time, I saw it at home. It was I think it was might have even been DVD when I saw it. Yeah, I think it was DVD. And it was in the midst of a bunch of other stuff that we were watching that night, and I don't think in all honesty, even really properly paid attention to it. And it was just because it was all over the place. I remembered having that feeling that it was kind of jumbled the first time I saw it, but it didn't really make much of an impression. But I think it's because, in a weird way, because of what was going on that night, I didn't really pay much attention to it. I didn't really focus on it. So it's not a film that I had any negative association with it. I just don't have a lot of association with it at all. So this is going to be an interesting retrospective for me. You talked about how you first heard about it, Eric, and some of your initial impressions when you first saw it. As a part of the retrospective format, what we do is we also discuss how we feel about the film today. So tell me, Eric, having recently revisited The Fisher King, how do you feel about the film today?
Well, I liked it when I first saw it. I should have probably made that clear, even though it was a little bit disjarring to me. I do remember liking it, but I haven't watched the film since then. That kind of tells you something as far as, I thought it was kind of weird. Um, but I will say, seeing it again, it's a really fascinating film to me. I mean, the cinematography is beautiful. It's a very, very well filmed. I mean, this is almost like an art film. It's filmed so well, in my opinion. Robin Williams' performance is absolutely crazy, which is what you would expect from Robin Williams. Amanda Sand has a good comment here that he mentions The Fisher King seems to be about when Robin Williams began to transition beyond comedy and into more dramatic roles, showing his broader talents. Tom Hanks has also made that transition. And I agree with you, Sand. That's kind of how I remember it as well. Is like this was kind of a turning point for Robin Williams' career. And you can really see it in the film now with that sort of 2020 hindsight, because yes, he's incredibly Robin Williams in this film. And by that, I mean, he's zany, he's kooky, he's insane. He's literally insane. And the thing is that it's also, it's got that sort of funny, kooky element, but then there's also an incredibly tragic, an incredibly heartfelt element to this as well, where there were moments when I was watching this where I was tearing up. And I pretty much knew it was coming. It'd been a while since I'd seen the movie, but there are some really tough moments. There's an element about mass shooting in this film, which is very topical to today. There's all sorts of elements like that. So it's kind of interesting to watch, in the perspective of the here and now, because in so many ways, it's extremely topical because it deals with issues of post-traumatic stress. It deals with issues of mass shootings. It deals with all sorts of different, issues of homelessness, mental illness, all those kinds of things that are still so topical today, and a really interesting performance by Robin Williams. What was your impression, Dave? Especially, it's interesting how you told me that you have no real attachment to it, in the past, that you really weren't into it when you first saw it, or it just kind of passed you by. How do you feel about it now?
Well, I was kind of awestruck by how well crafted the film is to begin with. Because, like I said, it didn't really make much of an impression when I originally saw it. But again, like I said, I can tell you right now, having just recently rewatched it for the show, I clearly wasn't paying attention. It is an incredibly well crafted film. It is an amazingly topical film right now for a film actually having been made, in the 90s with a sort of Howard Stern kind of personality. I feel like the time of Howard Stern, is kind of sort of past, at least the super electric, like it persona that he had at one point. I feel like that's kind of diminished. So in a weird way, that part of this,
But
while
I'll
relevant,
mention this. I just want to mention this, Dave. It is interesting, though, that we're still talking about the effect that the media has on mass shootings, right? We still
yeah,
talk about that today.
yeah. And so it's interesting how that kind of persona is supposed to be the Jeff Bridges character. I think is supposed to be a big hook for people to get them into the story, and it's interesting. But in a weird way, I feel like we're so far removed from that kind of personality because radio has diminished to an extent that it comes off a little weird at first. But the performances in this too are top notch all across the board. Whether you want to talk about Jeff Bridges, Robin Williams is pretty much wonderful in everything I've ever seen him in, but he's very good in this. Mercedes Rule is really great in this. Like everyone is really great in this. Um, and I was amazed at how sucked into the story I was. I was amazed at how moved I was at times. Um, I feel like I clicked more with the dramatic ideas and the concepts being explored more so than the comedy. The fantasy elements to me work best when they service the psychoses of the particular characters. There's a scene where, spoiler alert, because we're going to talk about this in a spoiler manner. So again, spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen The Fisher King. There's a moment in the film where Jeff Bridges' character goes to retrieve this item, and when he goes there to retrieve it, that whole thing was absolutely ludicrous. I found that because the film does such a great job of bringing you along. That was the moment that took me out of the film. But with the exception of that particular scene, um, this film is one of the. I'm shocked that I don't talk to people about this movie. I'm surprised that this film didn't have a bigger impact on me when it originally came out. Um, I just was completely blown away by what a great film this is. And when it was originally suggested, I thought, yeah, sure, we'll do The Fisher King. Um, but it's such a great film. That's the thing that amazed me the most. This is a really, really great film. And especially when you look at what we had watched before. I mean, we're going from The Gifted to Fisher King. I mean, these are two completely different things, number one. But the quality and the craftsmanship and everything that's going into it, whether you want to talk about the performances or the writing, whether you want to talk about, the literary, notations or connotations of the underpinnings of the story. It's just the whole thing was just absolutely it's just a great film. That's the thing that shocks me the most is what a great film that this is. And how in a weird way, how there's so much topical content to this film. Having been made in the 90s, it still has a lot of very topical things to discuss. And I was
I, want,
I
I
would
wanted
that
to I wanted to stop you for a second because one thing that I thought was interesting was that you talked about how different it is from what we reviewed earlier, The Gifted. But what I think is interesting is, again, I would emphasize that I feel like this is a very difficult film to define as far as genre. Don't you think you could argue that Robin Williams' character is kind of a superhero?
Yes, he's very much a superhero. He
Yeah.
went through yeah, especially because when let me bring this closer. For those that are comics fans, you'll diehard comics fans, you'll get this. For some of you in the audience, you may not. But Kevin Smith reinvented or attempted to reintroduce Green Arrow to the comic book reading public at one point. And Green Arrow, the original Green Arrow, Oliver Queen had died, and his son had basically taken over for a period of time, and he was the new Green Arrow. So Kevin Smith came on and did a really great series with Phil Hester and Matt Wagner, and they kind of reintroduced the Oliver Queen, the classic Green Arrow, back into the DC universe. And the first time you see him, he looks like a crazy homeless man, and he's got a makeshift arrow that he's put together out of something, and he's accosting these two rough, sort of rough, thuggish type characters. That's the way you get reintroduced to Oliver Queen when he's brought back into the DC universe in the Kevin Smith series. And I couldn't help but think about that when I saw the introduction of Robin Williams in this, because he's doing the same exact thing. Like, it's the same thing. So I'm pretty sure that's what Kevin Smith was inspired by when he came up with that idea. At least I think
inspired by.
Well, no, I mean, you take in influences from all different kinds of things. The things that makes it unique is what you do with it. You know what I mean? But I couldn't help but think about that. But yeah, he is very much sort of like a superhero character, especially when he's initially introduced. But
he even has a lair. He even has like his own little weird headquarters and a lair and all that stuff.
An outfit, a uniform. He's got the whole, exactly. But
Jane saved me. James saved me. It's loosely inspired.
Yes, loosely inspired. Yeah. But the thing I was most shocked about, revisiting it here for the show, is what a wonderful, interesting film this is. I almost felt kind of ashamed, the fact that it didn't have more of an impression with me, because I remember being confused by it, and being a little bit too dismissive the first time I saw it, and I think it's because I was distracted and wasn't paying attention. But man, there's these really awesome sequences they do with the Red Knight where it's spitting the fire, and I mean, it's just this is if you've never seen this film, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. I love the Arthurian legend, and I remember there was some connections to the Arthurian legend from this movie, but I didn't realize just how much of a deep dive it was. But man, what an incredible film! What an incredible film! So that's my thoughts on the film today. I mean, I was just blown away by how good it is, and I, like I said, I felt kind of bad that, and it's not that I've been dismissive of the film. I just didn't think necessarily it was worth revisiting or rewatching, and that's the thing I'm most shocked at. Is it's definitely worth rewatching. It's definitely worth revisiting, and I feel like that, on my, because I have a bunch of, I still collect physical media, so I still have a lot of DVDs and Blu-rays and such on and so forth. And I really feel like this needs to be on the shelf with my Robin Williams films. It needs to be on that shelf, sitting there next to Dead Poets Society. You know what I mean? I was really amazed at how good this movie was.
Dead Poets Society is one of my favorite films. I relate to it in so many ways because I went to an all-boys high school, and I relate to it in all sorts of ways personally. And I think it's definitely up there with Dead Poets Society. I think there's no doubt about that. And James does mention you're both welcome, because it was his suggestion that we watch this film. And thank you, because we appreciate that. We appreciate people reaching out and asking us to check things out or review things. So we appreciate that quite a bit.
And then Man of Sand has a comment here too. He says the 2007 film the Adam Sandler movie Reign Over Me had some similar elements. Also, the more recent Joker movie starring River Wax's Joaquin Phoenix makes him almost like a dark anti-hero rather than just a supervillain. Yes, most definitely. It looks at the Joker as more of a dark anti-hero than necessarily a quote unquote supervillain.
I like this connection, man, because I hadn't even thought about this. This is really interesting because Dave and I are both fans of the Joker film, and I didn't make that connection at all. But you're right, especially with the mental illness. there is a similarity between these two characters. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I did reflect on that just a little bit when I was watching the film. Is that because it's a very interesting look at um, mental illness and the ways in which our minds sometimes can run away with us, or sometimes lead us down a path that normally we wouldn't choose. And
But that
and for
reminds me,
me,
Dave. Dave, before we forget, because we said we would mention it, Hugh is in this, and
yes,
and
yeah,
you
Q is
talking
in it.
about
Yes,
this
yeah,
just the scene with him in it
yeah, yeah,
is pretty interesting, because the entire premise of that scene is basically that his character is some sort of an executive for a studio, and he's pitching a zany, quirky show about homelessness. And he
right.
wanted to show the plight of the homeless basically by making a situation comedy about them. So I thought was pretty interesting.
And it was weird too because in the quote unquote sitcom, they wanted to portray homelessness as a choice, and that it could be deemed sort of like a way to channel your freedom. This film was so topical right now; it's not even funny. So. And that was the thing I was also kind of most shaken by as I was watching it, is just thinking about how topical the film kind of is, in a lot of different ways. Um, but man, yeah. John Delancey, of course, played Q. He shows up and he's a television executive, and he's got this great idea that he's pitching them. Well, he's pitching Jeff Bridges' character, and his agent, which is actually his agent is actually Frasier's brother from Frasier. I can't remember the actor's name. And yeah, yeah, when he was pitching, I was like, wow, that's such a horrible thing. And this is a great
That's
cast.
actually what's funny is that's the moment that brings back Jeff Bridges' character, because at that
Yeah,
point he's decided to turn his back on Robin Williams and all of his friends. He's basically decided to turn his back on that life. He's turned his back on his girlfriend and got
yeah,
some new hot young girlfriend, and he's going back up. And that's the moment when he realizes, I've gone too far. I've gone
yeah,
too far in this
yeah,
pitch from this a-hole. You know what I mean? Now
yeah.
I've gone too far. I like that. I thought that was good because, there are a lot of evil producers out there. I might
Well,
even
and
be
it,
one of them. I might even be one of them. So,
well, and they talk about one of the things that's brought up is that yes, and James brings up that it's David Hyde Pierce who actually plays his agent, which ironically he looked an awful lot like the guy who had the shotgun who did the mass shooting too, which I thought was a weird parallel, to the point that I almost wonder if that was intentional. Um,
that's an interesting catch because I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. There is a visual similarity. And that particular actor, I've seen him. He's a character actor. He's in a lot of stuff, but I don't know his
yeah,
name either. The man who plays the gunman.
yeah, but they're so similar. It almost made me wonder along the lines of like, are they saying that in a weird way, like his career, his choices are, sort of destroying him in a manner of speaking. And then when his agent takes him into that horrible meeting, it even reinforces that concept even further, because that personality only shows up, it seems like, at these weird pivotal moments, and then the things that come out of them are defining. You know what I mean? It's just kind of
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
weird
Absolutely.
kind of a thing that I did kind of notice, because they look so similar. I'm like, I think that's intentional. I think we're supposed to draw a conclusion from this. Because that's the thing that's really great about this film, is that it is so well crafted, and it's so intentional in its choices at times, which is interesting too, because Robin Williams is known mostly for his ability to kind of be in the moment and sort of like improvise, and so it's hard to imagine trying to create such a sort of a focused, intentional, driven, narrative with someone who's known to sort of in the moment, just in a very somewhat sometimes chaotic manner. You know what I mean? Kind of spiral out of control. It works for the
Yeah.
character, but at the same point, I could see where shooting it, like every once in a while, you could find yourselves in it, and an unfortunate sort of moment in terms of the narrative. But again, that goes back to reinforce what an incredibly talented actor and a professional Robin Williams was too. The fact that he's able to do that, but not take it so far off the wheels that the narrative is still moving forward in the manner in which it needs to. So that's the thing. I was just amazed. Like I said, there was just one moment that took me out of the film, because up until that moment, everything that was that fantastical, you could attribute to someone's psychoses as for why it was occurring. So at that point in the film, when that particular moment occurs, I found it to be a bit, like I said, just a little bit off-putting. It took me out of the film just a little bit, just because I was like going, wait a minute, this is happening for real? Like, because when I thought he would go to try to retrieve this particular object that they need to help one of the characters out, I thought he would just show up at the guy's door and be like, hey, look, can I borrow this thing? Like I thought he was going to use a celebrity, status, you know what I mean, to acquire the object. Does that make sense?
But what fun would that be? What fun would that
I
be if you just went
agree.
up there?
I
I mean,
agree.
seriously, because it's interesting to me that, because what you're saying, I totally understand. There is a sort of fantastical element to what Jeff Bridges' character does to achieve Robin Williams' goal. But in the end, of course, what he does essentially heals them both. And this is, of course, supposed to be some sort of analogy to the Fisher King's story, and the idea that this item heals them, right? So I
Right.
think my thought is that obviously film is a visual medium, and they wanted to show that they wanted to have this sort of concrete action that we could see that was going to heal the two of them, and they had to do it in a visual manner, and they had to show it because that's what films are supposed to do. That's my thought on it.
Well, like I said, it was that, like I said, that was it, and it didn't ruin the movie for me at all. It just kind of took me out of the film a little bit. But like I said, other than that, and that's kind of a bit of a nitpick, to be honest. This is incredibly well crafted and made film, and like I said, I felt kind of ashamed. I mean, that when it was initially recommended, I was kind of going, yeah, whatever, sure, we'll do that. But in hindsight, such an interesting and wonderful film. So I myself, I cannot recommend someone take the time to revisit the Fisher King enough, because and two, it was it's an original story. You know what I mean? It's just everything about it. It's so terribly interesting. So tell me, Eric, would you recommend that people check out the Fisher King?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I will say that it's something that you should prepare yourself for a little bit. As Dave mentioned from his own experience, this is not a film that you watch casually. Get your adult beverage ready. Get your snacks ready. Make sure that you're not going to be distracted, and really watch the movie and process it, because this is one of those kinds of movies that really deserves your full attention if you're going to even try to understand it or enjoy it. It's not mindless entertainment.
That's very true. Definitely not that.